Welcome to Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD, the podcast that delves into the diverse and impactful roles scientists can play beyond the lab. With me, David Mendes. This week, I have the great pleasure of having with me Melissa Jean Gismondi. Melissa is an award-winning writer and radio and podcast producer whose work has appeared in major media outlets, including the New York Times, the Walrus, the Globe and Mail, Literary Review, and on the CBC Radio programs Ideas, Tapestry, The Current, and Writers and Company. In 2019, the Writers' Trust of Canada named her one of the 5 rising stars, and she was the 2020 to 2021 New Media and Public Humanities Fellow at the Jackman Humanities Institute at the University of Toronto. Melissa holds a PhD in American History from the University of Virginia. Melissa, again, it's a great pleasure to have you here today. Welcome to Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
It's really exciting to me too. You have been these past few years working on great content on the podcast side of things. It's a medium that was born some time ago, but is evolving day by day. And I'm really excited to have someone here who comes from within the medium. It's not a frequent occurrence. But apart from that, I'm also super happy that you're here because your path from academia to this modern and I would say cutting edge industry in the media domain is not a traditional one. And of course, the title of this episode and this conversation is The Power of Graduate Internships. And I'm eager for you to talk about that. But first, I always ask guests to add 1 or 2 things to kind of give a wider picture of who they are. So can you tell people who are watching, people who are listening, 1 or 2 other things that define who is Melissa Gismondi?
Wow. I don't think I've ever been asked that question before. It's such a simple but good question. I'm a very creative person, and that is a lot of what I do job-wise. I'm a runner, and that helped a lot during graduate school to go for long runs, sometimes with people, sometimes alone. Those things also really sort of helped keep me sane, continue to as well. And I think the creative component is something I underappreciated during graduate school that I've sort of spent the last couple of years reconnecting to. So yeah, I think those are 2 sort of different components of me that don't fit neatly into the little bio box.
That's interesting. I really find it interesting what you say, because it really kind of completes the picture, because in a sense what I'm hearing is there's a part of you where ideas are a part of you, or of the time during your day where ideas are born. There's a part of your day and of your life where you're producing things based on those ideas. And I'm kind of summarizing very quickly. And there's a part of the day when you're kind of in this meditative, I would say like that space, which is running alone or accompanied, but where your mind is elsewhere and you kind of recharge to then come back to the creation. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, 100%. And when I'm running, if I'm alone, sometimes I'll listen to podcasts, sometimes not. And I very frequently am taking notes. Like sometimes things will just I'll start writing a piece in my head, and I'll just stop to sort of write it down. Or that, I think, is, a lot of people talk about if you're doing sort of any sort of creative task, and writing a dissertation is a creative task. You have to create, you're shifting from, I remember I had a professor say, the tough thing about graduate school is you're shifting from being a consumer of scholarship to being a producer of it. And if you're in that production role, you need that space to just let your mind wander. And people talk about the power of boredom for creativity, which is in such short supply these days. So, almost scheduling, like, all right, this is, 45 minutes where I will not have anything. I'm just going to be, it's kind of weird sometimes, like we're not used to it anymore. But a lot of interesting things come from that place.
It's true. We're not used to the silence anymore. There's always something buzzing in your pocket, sound coming from anywhere in the spaces you're in, be they professional, commercial, or whatever. And yeah, there is value in that. But it's funny because boredom, there's kind of a negative connotation, at least in my view, to the word, and maybe silence is another way to say it, or understimulation. I don't know. We're
Yeah,
overstimulated, and it's kind of putting your hand on the knob and just kind of going down, 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 and to let something bubble up from your mind, or else it just won't.
exactly. Yeah, for sure. No, definitely.
Now, you mentioned that running was a part of your graduate school life and was important, if not key, to that part of your life. Can you develop a little bit more on that? I'd really like to know what you mean by that.
Yeah, so it's funny, just like time-wise, I actually started running as I entered my PhD program. So I was living in Montreal doing my master's. Fortunately, I started running in April of the year in Montreal. So by the time I moved, I was living in California, so I didn't have to try and run through Montreal winter.
Oh my, yeah.
Yeah. It was when I was living in places that were, I moved to outside Sacramento, California. When I was living in places I didn't really know anyone, that were very different from me. When I was dealing with the stress of graduate school, getting away from screens, getting away from the dissertation. I had a small running group when I was transferred and was in Charlottesville, Virginia, with some graduate students. So many different components of it, whether it was like the physical stimulation of just moving my body, because so much of what you do in graduate school is passive, right? It's passive, but it's very demanding intellectually, but you're just sitting there reading or writing, moving my body, being outside in nature. It was huge. It was just purely coincidence, but I'm very grateful that I took up running at that time, because I think about just what an impact physically, emotionally, like in so many ways, it helped me. So, I think it doesn't have to be running for someone, but something that gets you away from that world for a little bit.
Yeah. And would you say that, because you mentioned running with people, that there was also having a community aspect to it?
Yeah, so when I moved to Charlottesville, Virginia, I was a transfer student. So I didn't really, I was sort of entering, I left my cohort in California and I was entering not really this community or cohort sort of already existing. And I joined a couple other history graduate students. They were training for a marathon. I didn't, or half marathon, but I thought I'll just, I'll run with them. And we ran every Saturday morning together. And we were all history students, but we talked about, one of them was studying Spanish Catholicism and, New Spain and very different things. And so, yeah, sometimes we talked about history and we talked about, helped each other get through whatever was going on in graduate school. And then it was nice to have a place to be and people who are waiting for you, which isn't always the case in those early days of graduate school when you're alone a lot.
No, it's true. And I guess also, I imagine there's a positive to having this community of people who are not in grad school with you, who are, yes, in the same domain, you can discuss things, but they're not your, lab mates or whatever, because it's a different universe. So there's not so much interference with actual, I don't know, day to day of your research. It's very interesting, and it makes a lot of sense to me. So I think we do have a better picture of who Melissa is. I think we also start to get a picture of this arriving in Montreal, and how you took this new activity that actually brought kind of a healthy a healthy, how can I say, breath of air into your graduate school day to day. Now, I mentioned when I presented you all this work that you've done in writing and podcast production with, in outlets that are really, really well known. I mentioned New York Times. I mentioned different programs on CBC. But when you start a PhD, it's not usually the type of career that you envision. What was your vision for yourself? Let's say your 5-year vision or your post PhD vision when you started.
I mean, I did a PhD because I thought I wanted to be a history professor. And I had phenomenal American history professors at McGill who, and they're sort of legendary. Like when you talk to other people, I'll meet other people who would say, oh yeah, I took one of his classes. It's the kind of classes where your face lights up. And so I thought, that's what I want to do. Like, I want to do that. And I knew I had to, if I wanted to be competitive in terms of getting a job in American history, I would probably have to go to the US. So that's what I did. And I think I sort of, this is maybe a little bit cynical, but I sometimes call it sort of like playing the game of, doing the conference in the humanities, doing the conference rotations, doing the peer review, all of that. I was doing it for a couple years. And then I think I slowly started to realize that the way I could maybe try to get it to work out for me was not sort of what I wanted for my life. I would be up, some of my friends in my graduate program, they were applying to, 50, 80 jobs, and they wanted to be a professor so badly that they were totally okay moving to places where they didn't know anyone and, all of that. And I started to, I'd been away from where I grew up outside Toronto for a long time. And I started to think, I don't think I want it that badly. I didn't know what else to do, but I started to know if it works out in a way that I like, great. But I didn't see it happening. And I think another thing too is I didn't love being a specialist. Like there are things that I'm interested in, but I'm very interested in a lot of things. And I think that's what pulled me towards something like journalism and nonfiction writing, where there are specialists, and if you in like news, there are reporters who have certain beats, but otherwise, I've done stuff on bioethics and politics and literature that doesn't really work in the academic world, right?
Of course. This is it's interesting, and so it seems to me that you didn't have around you people to model. Look, when you started thinking, okay, I'm not going to fight or go for a professorship and go all the distance to get that. I don't want to have these compromises of needing to move, etc., etc., which is a question for a lot of us who go through the PhD at that point. And I have the feeling that you didn't feel that you had tools or information on what else you could do, which is also a frequent issue. Graduate students are formed with one objective, professorship, and then they hit this 10, 15, 20% wall, depending on the domains. It can vary, of people who actually can access tenured track professorship, and then the other 80% often end up having to just improvise and scramble at the end in the last year to figure out, okay, what career can I land after these 5 years of very specialized training?
Yeah, no, I didn't. So I guess this is where the internship comes in. When I transferred to the University of Virginia, I guess I'd been there maybe a year, and there was an internship that came up at Backstory, which ran for, I think it was about 12 years. It started out as a public radio show, produced, and they sort of distributed it to different public radio stations across the US, and it was produced out of Charlottesville. And then as I was an intern, they actually shifted to be podcast only. They've since wrapped up production, but they had an internship for a researcher for the show to sort of help, give the hosts research blurbs, because they were all historians, but they were obviously, again, they were experts in their field. So the show was about doing the history behind the headlines. So they could, if it was in their field, they could do it no problem, but sometimes they needed some research to just, as we all do, especially with, you don't always remember the specific dates and percentages and all of that. So I applied because I thought, well, I love radio and, why not? I remember asking my advisor if I thought it would work to my advantage or disadvantage in terms of getting an academic job. I remember him saying, it can't hurt. And if I can recall correctly, I don't think anyone else really applied. Like, most people were not that interested in it, because I think it was this narrative of, you do the work that will get you a tenure track job. And this was not considered part of it. But for me, it opened me up to a world of, freelance journalism writing, podcast production, audio production, all of those things. And it still took me a while to sort of see myself as someone who could do that. I definitely had imposter syndrome for a long time. And I thought, well, I'm the historian research assistant here. But it at least started to I've started to familiarize myself with that world. And I think that was pretty significant for me. I didn't see it at the time, as often happens, but looking back, it was significant.
Yeah. And how was your day to day? So, you have to add this activity to your agenda. How did you organize? How did you negotiate those first moments of, okay, now part of my week is spent in this other place, but I still need to be working on my research? Because that's something people often ask, or it's often the objection that they have is I can't do something else. I have to put all my eggs in this PhD basket, and they wonder how can they add something else to their day to day.
I think one thing that really helped me was the fact that I was no longer, I was on a fellowship, so I did not have to teach anymore, be a teaching assistant. So that, understandably, for I think a lot of other students, probably they felt like, I can't take this on in addition to being a teaching assistant on my other work that I have to do. So that freed up some time. And I think, it gave me, I talked about places to go. I would go into the office where they made the show, and I would do, I think it was like 10 hours a week at first. But I think it also, the pace of it quickly, A, I liked the pace of it, and B, it sort of adjusted me out of that academic pace, which can be quite slow. At this show, they produced a show once a week. So there was always new topics, always new research. When I was there, they were organizing a specific appearance on another NPR show. So then which was a daily show. So then there was a brief period of a lot of research needed. It was short, time span. It just readjusted me to different paces of work. And that, I think, also was really helpful, because I can imagine for others, that is a tough adjustment to make if you're used to having months and months and months to do something, and then you enter a different industry where, it's daily or weekly or whatever it is.
Yeah, definitely the pace at which time passes is something that's often referred to by people in industry, or vice versa. People changing from one side to the other of the fence is how times flows at different speeds. And also that how projects need to be closed at different speeds too. Um, Now, a question still about this new space. You mentioned imposter syndrome just before. Did you have some mentorship? How was the onboarding into this new team that you were now starting to contribute to?
The senior producer he was really great. And he helped me. They'd had a research assistant before, I believe, or they were sort of, so he helped me. In a way, it was like I was sort of already primed for it because, you have to sort of basically write little research blurbs on a subject. It was about American history, so I could already sort of know the basics of it. I think that in terms of mentors, I met soon, I can't recall her official title, but there was a woman named Diana Williams who worked there, who she would work on their digital strategy for the show. But I remember really sort of saying to me, why don't you start writing things like op-eds, connecting. This was also, I think, when people were starting to really connect what was going on in the show, was connecting what was going on in the news to history, providing historical context. And it was sort of like, oh, me, and she said, helped me publish my first op-ed, suggested I write it, suggest I pitch it to a newspaper. And those are, I think, the little, like the people you meet along the way. And, I've been fortunate enough to have several of them who help you see something in yourself that maybe you can't yet, or you're not in that space, or I was still probably thinking I'm just a failed historian, like something like that.
Yeah. Well, which a lot of people at the end of the PhD, when they end up outside academia, this is a feeling that's shared by a lot of people. This feeling of failure, of failing out, and it's totally not true. Especially if 80% of people, it's the path that they end up following. It can't be failing out. It's just the natural way of things. There's a selection for those small number of tenure track positions, and then the rest of us, the socioeconomic structure will absorb us and will need our skills in another way. That's the way I see it. Now, there's one thing I didn't ask you, or a detail that I wanted. You said that you saw this job posting. How did that come up? Where were you looking for job postings? Because often people also wonder, where can I find these opportunities that are not exactly, canonical, let's say.
If I remember correctly, it was sent through. So because it was all within the show was produced by Virginia Humanities, which is the state sort of humanities agency, and it had connections to the University of Virginia, where I was a student. I believe it came through sort of our history department graduate listserv. A friend had passed it to me and said, you should apply. You love radio. And I would have the radio on and listen to it all the time. So I think in that case, it was fairly easy. But one thing, I would really say to people is I think there are so many opportunities in like the university structure and the system, and there are so many things. And once you're not a student, you can't take advantage of them usually. So while you're a student and you qualify, you can apply, I think like, what's the harm? Worst case scenario, you don't like it and you think this isn't for me. And then that. But so I think sometimes it probably requires a bit of legwork, but I think at most sort of large research universities that would have types of PhD programs probably have some sort of internship that might be of interest to you.
Mm-hmm. So do explore those resources while you're in graduate school, and it applies for all the other stuff. Like I often mention mental health services. If you need that, if you're in grad school, take advantage of it while you're there. All of these things, when you leave, then you're not eligible anymore. So for sure, no, I totally agree.
Yeah, I remember it was really, I went to a mindfulness, you mentioned mindfulness at the beginning. I went to a mindfulness meditation group for graduate students. And I remember when I graduated, I stayed to do one semester as an adjunct. And I remember going to the leader and saying, please, can I still come? And she said, just because I thought, those great things, there are great things that are available for students.
And usually also the add-on that I add to that, because it was my experience and it was your experience too. When you're from abroad, you might be overwhelmed by being in this new country or new city, and you might go into tunnel vision and not see these things. And try to be well mindful of all the things that are available. Go to the student services. Even though you're a graduate student, there'll be someone there who'll be able to share some info with you and to point you towards whichever resources are. And I think often if you're a foreign student, you might just miss out because you're dealing with all this other stuff in your life.
Oh, yeah. And I think they often have career counselors too available for graduate students. So I think I didn't do that, but I wish I had.
Yeah, and that's it now. Hindsight is 2020, right? But that's why we're here. That's why Beyond the Thesis is here, is because we went through these things, and we now can look back and say, here's how I would have done it if I knew all that I know now. And hopefully people listening, people watching, if you are in grad school, you can not do the same mistakes that we did.
Yes.
Now, you mentioned this person who kind of mentored you and who kind of believed in you and got you to believe in you, and I really like that because it kind of talks to the subject of imposter syndrome, and it feels like there's a message there of, if someone else around you, who in this case has more experience, says, hey, I see you doing A or B, or this role or that role, and your imposter syndrome says, no, sorry, it's not for you, you're too green, whatever. I think there's a message there, right, of trust this person, uh, and dip your toe in the pool and allow yourself to try. It feels like it's what you did.
Yeah, I've done it. There was that time, and then another time, my sort of first entry point into working with CBC. I remember, there was this great manager, Linda Shorten, who thought, I think she could be a great producer. And I remember going home thinking, I'm not a producer. I'm like, I don't know what they do, and I don't, and I mean, how silly would it have been if I said, no, that's not, I can't do that. And
Well, people do that. People do
no,
that every day.
I know. And I know why people do it. I really didn't have much to lose because I didn't have anything else going on. And it was a great opportunity. But yeah, I think a big part of this for people who leave with PhDs and don't know how to find their path in the job market, for me, a big part of it has been connecting and being lucky enough to find those people who will believe in you and see that you do have something to offer. Very often there are people who have also come with PhDs and have found their path, and it's sort of like I know what it's like, come under my wing, I'm going to help you. It's not always, so for these two women I mentioned, they saw something in me and they encouraged me, and that's luck. Like, that's part of it, is you just need someone to give you a break very often. And I don't know about everyone, but I know for me, when I left graduate school, it was tough. Like, I didn't know you have I think a lot of people, you have an identity crisis. I've been a student for so long. Who am I now? What am I? If you don't have a path, you really don't know.
Yeah.
So
I'm not going to be teaching.
I'm not going to be
all of these.
teaching. I'm not, and I don't, you're not always in a great place where you can believe in yourself and have that confidence. So to those gracious people who see it in you, and I think most people meet them. I think they're out there for everyone.
Mm-hmm. No, and you do come out of the graduate school experience, especially the PhD, with a specific, let's say, flavor of creativity, and of language, and of there's a formatting to how you think and how you structure your ideas. There's a stamina, an endurance too. I feel that people come with, which is not a given for everyone. Um, and you also mentioned it, an ability of an ability to learn on the go, about something that you didn't know about yesterday, but someone asks you to go now study it, and you can kind of quickly make yourself, not a specialist, but someone who now has a good modicum of knowledge about this domain, which in the domains that you worked is key and is part and parcel of the day to day, I feel. But not only, if you go into industry, you're from the life sciences like me, you go into industry, you go into the government, into policy, whatever. These types of skills are very transferable. But I agree that there's an identity crisis. There's some sadness at the end, of that journey. But we're here to tell people that feeling is because you're kind of leaving this tribe for which you had kind of prepared yourself years and years to go into. But the good news is there's a bunch of people and organizations and corporations and government, etc., out there, structures that are really eager to have people like you with the skills, of a PhD, the transferable skills of a PhD, that need these people in them. And well, this, to more and more more and more people are going and trying to solve these issues that we have today, be it climate, be it social unrest and migration. And there's more and more problems get more and more complex. So having a research background and a research mindset is going to be useful in different walks of life, I'd say.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think those feelings are totally normal. Like, of course, you're going to feel frustrated, angry, grieving. That's just totally normal. And so I think understanding that for a lot of people, that's part of the process. I didn't know that at the time, but now I see lots of other people I've known go through it. And it's like, of course, how could it be any different? I'd been a student for my whole life and now I wasn't anymore, I had no attachment to a university. It was a big change.
Yeah. And this kind of shows how the PhD is in a way a solitary endeavor, because I went through the same. I thought that the difficulties I had at the end of the PhD were was something just particular to me, were my fault, whatever. And then years went by, and like you, I was like, oh no, the students I'm talking with now who are who are in this career fair are going through the exact same questioning and the exact same pain that I was. So I think it's important to talk about it and to normalize. Now, one thing we didn't talk about is your, because you had this internship which was around the middle of your PhD, or because what was the temporality, and how did you go from that to then finishing, to then adjuncting, like you said, but then kind of accepting that, okay, this is not the path that I want to follow?
So yeah, I did the internship, I think for 2 years. And then for the last year, I thought, okay, I'm going to focus on wrapping up the dissertation. And then they got another graduate student in to do it. I think we got 2 applications when I left. And so then I focused on just finishing, because I knew I just wanted to finish the dissertation. And then I didn't know what to do. And I thought, well, I'll just adjunct at I taught a class. I had applied for an internship at the Walrus, which is a sort of current affairs magazine here in Canada. And I didn't get it. But another person sort of thinking this person has potential, the woman who's now the senior editor said, we're not going to give it to you, but I think you should write for us. So I started sort of working on pieces with her. I was adjuncting. And I think actually like one moment, so I graduated in May 2017, or I defended in May 2017. And then the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville was August 2017. And the woman, Heather Heyer, who was killed, that was just a couple blocks from where I was living at the time. And that was sort of a pretty transformative moment for me in terms of realizing how much, I already knew this, but it really cemented it, how much the historical context matters for all of these crises that were, you mentioned a handful of them. Because, the issue was about this statue of Robert E. Lee, one of the Confederate generals, and if it was going to get taken down. And, there's a lot of misconceptions about when the statue was created and why and all of these things. And so it really, I guess, made me see that there was a bigger purpose to sort of applying history to journalistic practices and journalistic stories. So then I left adjuncting because I just thought like it was just sort of putting salt in the wound of me still being, and I didn't know what to do. And I just sent out emails and networked, and through cold call emails, I got a path into the CBC and happened to meet that woman, Linda Shorten, at a time when she needed people on the show Tapestry. And I was there sort of in a freelance, temporary, casual basis, but for about a year. And that's where I really learned a lot of the role of being a producer, because before then, a lot of the work I had done with Backstory was the research behind the scenes, helping providing the producers with research. Now I was the producer. Yeah. And I think that was part of the identity crisis.
Yeah. No, and I think reinventing yourself is part of the game afterwards. I think you did something right, which was keep cold emailing and reaching out to people. It's still it works. Of course, the fact that you had these 2 years experience must have counted. Must on the scale for people you were reaching out to. So there's that. How can I say? If you finish your PhD, you just did your PhD research, and then you try reinventing yourself on the fly and try to land a position. It can happen depending on who you talk to, who you meet, and the things that you bring from before even graduate school. But this internship, I'm sure, was really instrumental in people opening up your email and going through it with interest, and then opening that door to you working freelance and eventually work in a different capacity. The other thing that I like is that it seems that you kind of learned on the job. Do you remember the first position, that freelance position? What was the job title?
Oh, that was associate producer. And yeah, and that's this is, I think, also, I didn't even know what the job of a producer was. I remember I was working and I loved it. And I said to my colleague, I can't believe this is a job, so you don't know what exists as well, right? Yeah.
And that's why I always try to get people to, at least from year 2, 3 of their PhD, in countries like ours where it can go to 4, 5, 6, by the middle of the PhD, that they start widening their horizons and seeing what's out there. Because if you start at 3 months before you defend, it's too late to learn what's out there, what jobs are people getting, what's the lingo, what's the culture, etc. It's too short an amount of time. But what's interesting about what you said, and that's why I asked about the job title, is that you got a job title that you didn't really know what it was, and that you learned on the go, probably shadowed someone, you were mentored. And often people, especially people who are given to overthinking, and I know that women do it more than men, when a job description, when you don't fill all the check boxes, or at least the majority of them, you don't apply. And here is Melissa going into a position with a name that she really didn't know exactly what it meant, but someone told her, hey, come and work for us, we think this is going to be cool for you. And you took that leap of faith. You believed in yourself. You also believed in what the other person was kind of envisioning for you. And ta-da, you actually became that. And you made it your job. I think it's there's a great lesson there of not taking job postings face value, and it's something that when we come from academia, well, we don't know. It's a culture we haven't been in, so we're very Cartesian. We look at something. Oh no, I'm missing, I don't know, 50% of my data. I can't publish this article.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's more flexible than that, I'd say.
Yeah, and I think for me, like, I was applying to CBC. I thought, okay, well, where would be cool places to work? So I was applying to CBC jobs. They were predominantly admin assistant type jobs, because I just thought, I'm just going to throw this and see where it goes. Had I seen an associate producer job, I would not have applied to it, precisely for what you're saying. In my case, and this is there's a lot to say about what's bad about the precarious nature of work for a lot of people these days. The one good thing is I didn't have to apply. I was sort of hired on like a day, come in tomorrow, we'll see how it goes. And then tomorrow became a week and then a month. And this will often happen, I think, with people. And then maybe down the road, you got to actually apply. But they're trying you out, but you also get to try them out and see if it works for you, if you like it. And again, there's a lot that's bad about it, but that's one thing that's good.
Definitely. Melissa, we're getting to the end of the interview, and but I still have one or two things that I'd like to ask you. It because we're looking back, like I was saying, hindsight is 2020. We can kind of make sense and put everything, this goes here, this goes there. But I think we've been also frank, you especially, in the fact that there was serendipity, there was luck involved to a certain sense. You were doing legwork, but there was a human factor of interacting with people who got to know you and who kind of opened the door for you, or actually kind of made you aware of possibilities and kind of offered you a chance to try something out. And people who are finishing, let's say, a PhD might feel, well, it's unfair that after all of this work, I still have to face uncertainty or be reliant on luck to a certain extent. And of course, it's not all luck, but I'd really like to spend a few minutes as we end this conversation on this, because I think people can be afraid of this and may not take the leap because of the uncertainty. People can have negative feelings about it, but I think it's somehow it's an aspect of human life, but we need to accept it. And I don't know where I'm going, but I kind of I'd love to hear what you, looking back, what's your reflection on it, and what lesson we can take, and what's kind of an actionable piece of advice that we can give people listening?
Yeah, I guess the first thing I'd say is it is unfair. And it does, it is unfair. And I get those feelings. You work really hard in a PhD, and the reality is, for most of us, that's not going to be rewarded in like a traditional sense in terms, my salary never has reflected my education level or anything like that in other contexts where it might, so it is totally fair. I think the thing with luck is it's like that phrase of sort of how you have to, there's luck, but then you also have to be able and willing to meet the opportunity. So for instance, if I hadn't applied to that internship, my connection into the CBC, if I hadn't emailed the woman who happened to be the executive producer of a show, I'd actually emailed her before to complain about something, not on the show, but just sort of the lack of women participating in the monk debates, which were something they were airing. And she'd responded to me. And so when I emailed her a year later, or 2 years later, I said, you probably don't remember this, but if I hadn't done that, then I wouldn't have, it's all of those little things. And you don't have a plan. I mean, you have mini plans. You have the plan you're going to take that day. And you can't know where it's going to go 5 or 10 years down the road. I think that's tricky for PhD people because in the world of academia, it's rigid and it goes assistant professor, associate. We know the levels and we know how it goes. And that's not the case in the majority of the world. So in terms of action items, someone gave me this advice. It's sort of lean towards what excites you and lean towards where opportunities are showing up. So for me, I was getting nowhere with academic anything. Even if I was, there's a job at the University of Toronto, how cool would that be? I'll apply. I wasn't getting nowhere. But then someone at the Walrus wanted me to write for them. So I thought, all right, I'm going to lean. This is kind of exciting because it's scary and it's unknown. And this opportunity is being, someone's giving it to me. So I'm going to lean into that. Now, I wouldn't do that for something that felt just totally wrong for me, that you're every sort of cell in your body screaming, no, don't do it. But it will be scary. So, try to determine, okay, what's scary because this is new and unfamiliar versus scary because it's just not right for me and I don't want to do it. And sometimes I think people know staying in academia isn't right for them, but you do it anyways because you try to do it anyways because it's the familiar path and you know how it's going to go. And the other path, you have no idea, but it's sort of more exciting and it can lead to more interesting places sometimes.
Melissa, I think it's a great message to start wrapping up the episode. I just kind of want to do to sum up myself what I'm distilling from this almost hour that we've been together. And the first big takeaway for me is if there is something within you, a passion for something, an interest for something, don't let it go or don't ignore it while you're in graduate school. Of course, your graduate work is going to be taking a lot of your time, a lot of your bandwidth. But from your story, Melissa, I feel that small, tiny things that you do day by day to keep an interest, to feed an interest that you have, a passion that you have, can pay a lot of dividends later on. That's one message. And they can be small things. Of course, doing an internship is not a small thing per se. It was a big chunk of your week that was dedicated to that, but you were towards the end of your PhD. You had talked with your supervisor. It was fine, but you had this curiosity and this will to try it. And you could have decided, oh, no, it's too much of a commitment. it would have been very easy in an alternate universe that you would have seen it and you would have said, yeah, sorry, I'm doing a PhD. It's I want to finish it. It's not for me. So there's this thing about so feeding or nurturing something in you and not letting it die because you're in a PhD. That's one. Two, take a leap of faith of experimenting something different if an opportunity arises, and that's what happened with this internship that you had. Two, believe when someone in another space says, you know what, I know you're in another space, but hey, I'm just letting you know, it'd be great to have you as a colleague.
Yeah.
Believe them. Don't disregard or devalue what they're saying because your imposter syndrome is telling, oh no, you're going to be a professor and you're an academic. This is not for you. And maybe a last one, because I know this is a lot of little points, but I think they're really nice nuggets that we had along the way. A final one is it kind of ties up with the first one because it's little things, but it's little actions. You kept on writing. You wrote this email to this person at CBC saying, "Hey, there should be more women represented in this show." It sounds very, unrelated, but because you mentioned it, somehow it means that there's a link there. For sure the person remembered or could have gone back and said, oh yeah, I did get an email from you. And so you were already someone in her mind when that second email arrived, and you weren't just a new person trying to get her attention. And there was I think the point there, it's a point that and I'm going to finish here with, because I think it's already a lot, and it's also where we ended with what you shared. But nurturing connections, real connections, because when you wrote her the first time, it was because there was something that was important to you that you needed to share with her about this content. You didn't have any second hidden interests or whatever. You were just connecting with the person and saying, hey, I'm a listener, I'd like to have this improved. And what I often say is, ideally, if you want to have a healthy transition outside of academia, you should start building relationships, a wider network earlier on, since like the middle of your PhD at least. And it's because if you start building your network and your mindset is already, can you please get me a job? You're gonna fail. If you ask someone, hey, by the way, if there's a job, but someone you already know from 6 months, from a year ago, and say, hey, by the way, I'm going to be finishing my PhD in a few months. If you hear about something, I'm interested, in working in your domain. Totally different conversation. And I think there's a parallel with what happened with you. And I really think your story encapsulates a lot of great nuggets, and I hope people who listen will be able to savor them and to take some notes and to be able to kind of avoid the mistakes, avoid the pitfalls, and use the good ideas that you shared.
Hopefully, yeah.
Melissa, if people want to kind of thank you or just ask you something more, of course, here you have a website, melissajgismondi.com. But is there another way that or a better way for people to reach out and maybe comment on what they heard on the episode?
They can go to my website. I have an email address there. They can email me. I respond to almost every respectful email I get. Some are not so respectful, but I know your listeners are just, they would never do anything like that. On LinkedIn, I'm on Substack. I just started a new Substack newsletter. And it's paying it forward. There are great people who helped me. And so if I can help people and, provide some guidance or just be a space to offer some encouragement, happy to do that.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. As I always say to people who are watching or listening, you can hear how the people who are on the show are nice. People who are on LinkedIn are open to be reached out to. So if you're a little bit more shy, more timid, don't hesitate to. But if you have something to ask of Melissa, some more details or just a feedback on the story, just reach out. Don't hesitate. If you're listening and you have something that hasn't been covered on the show that you'd like to be covered, just you can write to ideas@papaphd.com. I'm always looking for new ideas, even ideas of guests. So don't hesitate to do that too. And I just want to thank you for being with us. Hope you have some nice take-home messages. And the last thing is, if there's someone around you who's doing the PhD and who would benefit from hearing Melissa's story, don't hesitate to share this episode with them. Melissa knows it. It's one of the best things you can do to help a podcast is to share it with someone you know. So, Melissa, thank you so much for being on Beyond the Thesis. This was a great conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another Beyond the Thesis conversation with me, David Mendes, and my guest, Melissa Gismondi. If you'd like to support the show and help me produce more interviews like this, just go to papaphd.com/PayPal and donate there. And if you want to help a little bit more, please go to papaphd.com/audience and fill in the survey that is there for you and leave a comment so I can give you a shout out in a future episode. Thank you for being a fan, happy listening, and happy sharing.